Now, let's talk about how to tune your ride on the snow like a pro. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for watching. We've hit 200 subscribers. So I really appreciate all the support. Thanks for watching and let's keep it going. Now, let's talk about how to tune your ride on the snow like a pro. Now these techniques are going to work just as well for skiing or snowboarding. I was on the national snowboard team for 6 years. We had to tune our boards each time depending on what conditions we were going to encounter. If it was going to be really cold, if it was going to be wet, we had a selection of different waxes that we had to use. We didn't have a whole fancy team like the ski teams did of technicians who would tune their skis for them. So we had to figure all this out on our own. Now for you guys, you'll be able to get away with some very basic stuff if you're just doing the average everyday riding. If you want to up your game to the professional level, then I can share with you some secrets about that, and you can always contact me for those. What I'm going to show you guys today will just give you some basic tips on how to get your ride sliding smoothly down the hill. Alright, let's get to it. Now when I was a kid growing up skiing, I used to bring my skis in once at the beginning of the season and get them tuned up, and I thought that was pretty good. But once I started racing, I realized you pretty much have to tune your board every day. The wax wears off pretty fast, especially if you're in icy course conditions, and your edges will wear down very fast if you're on ice as well. If you're in soft snow, then your edges aren't going to be as big of a deal, but depending what kind of riding you're doing and where you are, then you may need some sharp edges all the time, or you can get away with some pretty dull stuff. But the wax on your board is what makes it slide really well. We've all encountered situations where we've been there and we're trying to move and we just feel the board is sticky. Well, this is hopefully going to change that for you guys if you can wax your board more often. Alright, so what do we need? For the edges, we're going to need something to hold your files. Now most of you can get away with a generic file holder. I like to be a bit more specific, so I have a clamp that I use to hold my files in. You're going to need a selection of files going from fairly coarse to fairly mild, and a diamond stone. And to prepare your base, you're going to need some base cleaner, a brush, an iron, some wax, and if you got any holes to fill, you're going to need some P-Tex, a metal straight edge, and a lighter. So that's the basic equipment you're going to need, and we'll go through each step. Let's hit it. Alright, I've got a little divot here that I'm going to fix, and fairly straightforward. Take your P-Tex and your lighter, light it up. Once it's lit, it's going to start to drip. Let it burn for a little bit. Alright, now all I have to do is do a few drops into the hole and press it in. And let it cool. And once it's cooled, we'll scrape it off. So now while that P-Tex is cooling, let's start working on the edges, and then we'll get to scraping that. But when you're working on your edges, try to always work in the direction of travel. So the first thing you want to do, especially if you have a new ride, is you want to detune your tip and your tail. Those never need to be sharp. All that's going to happen is if your tip and your tail are too sharp, it's going to catch on the snow, and that's going to screw you up. So all you do is you just take the file, just run it at a 45 degrees, right up around to the point of the contact starts. And for the board, that would just be at the widest point, right here. And you just run the file at a 45, and then you never have to worry that it'll ever be sharp. Now, if your edges aren't in too bad shape, you can feel along, you might get away with just being able to use the diamond stone, which I always use when it's wet. And then all you do is just run it along the edge. And you can feel and hear whether it's hitting any burrs or not. And we'll just start with a little flat filing. Just take a little bit of tape, wrap it around the edge of the file just to give yourself a bit of an angle. And all you do is run the file down the length of the board. And as you run a few passes down the edge, you'll feel the edge coming off. Now if it's a super big ding that you have in your edge, you won't be able to get it all out, but you'll be able to get most of the burrs and little dings in them out and give yourself a nice smooth edge. And you just do that on both sides. Now a little tip you can do is, if you're not sure how much edge you want to take off, is if you just take a marker, draw the black edge on, and then you just sharpen away until that marker is gone. Alright, after you give it a file, take your diamond stone and you just have to run it up and down the edge. And all that's doing is smoothing out the edge, because the file is taking little bits out, making it a bit rough. And you want it as smooth as possible. Give it a wipe. And we're good. Alright, before we flip the board up on its side to do the side edges, just going to scrape off that P-Tex that we did. And as long as you have any kind of a metal straight edge, that'll be fine. I'm just using a cover from an electrical box. And all you do, just scrape it. There you go, one hole filled. All right, now just like the base, you want to run on the edge, you want to run the file all the way down from tip to tail along the direction of travel. And the same thing, if it isn't too rough, you can just get away probably with the diamond stone, but probably at least once a week you're going to want to give it a really good file. Now if it's really in rough shape, you can start with the really thick heavy file, do a few passes to take big chunks off, and then you can move to a medium one and then a fine one. Or you can, if it's not in too bad shape, you can just use a medium or fine one. And all you do is just run it down. You'll see the edges flying off. And you can use the same trick with the marker of running the marker along, and once you take off all the black of the marker, you've probably taken off enough edge. You can run your hands along it sideways and you can feel how sharp it is. I like to take my nail. When you can scrape your nail on it, you know you've done a pretty good job. Give it a wipe. Take your diamond stone, nice and wet, and then just run it along. There you go, you're all set. Now if you're doing any kind of park riding and you're sliding on rails, you're not going to want a sharp edge because that's going to catch. So what you can do is you can dull your edge slightly. You don't want to destroy it, but you can just give it a slight round by just giving it a slight file down so you can't get it sharp, and that'll help your rail riding in the parks. But if you're out there and you got some icy conditions and you want that nice sharp edge, then this is the way to get it. Alright, let's get to the base. Alright, so like I mentioned earlier, when I was a kid, I got it waxed and sharpened once at the beginning of the year and thought I was good. Then when I was racing, realized, yeah, you gotta wax this thing all the time, especially for the different conditions. Now as you can see a little bit of white right here. That's where the wax is worn away. And what's happening is if you don't wax, then that base is starting to burn against the snow, and the pores in the base will start to close up, and then you won't be able to get the wax to absorb in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by cleaning the base. Now you want a nice clean base because you don't want to be waxing in all the dirt and grime that you've picked up over the course of the season, especially early season when the snow is really dirty. So you just pour a little bit on the board, take your rag, wipe away, and you're good to go. Alright, as far as wax goes, like I mentioned, there's a whole selection of different temperature waxes you can get depending on the conditions. But what I've got here is just a generic all-in-one wax that I'm going to use. Usually better for warmer temperatures, and where I'm riding here in British Columbia, it's not getting too cold, and quite recently it's been fairly mild, so a 0 - 5 is perfect, but this one works pretty good. If you want to get more specific, or you know where you're riding where it's always cold, you can use a wax that's say -10 and down. Otherwise, I think for most of you, a generic wax will work just fine. Alright, so all you need now is an iron and your wax, and make sure that you're in a well-ventilated area. If you're not, please wear a mask. I have no idea what kind of chemicals are in these waxes, but I'm pretty sure they're not good for you. And if you're waxing your board a lot, you don't want to be inhaling that on a consistent basis. Alright, make sure your wax is warm but not too hot that it's smoking. And then all you do is take it, touch it against the iron, and drip it all over the board. Then just iron it in. Make sure to get coverage over everything. Alright, we'll let that cool, then we'll give it the final step, the scrape and the brush. Alright, the base is nice and cool. Get yourself a plastic scraper, and like with everything, we're working the direction of travel, and all we're doing now is just going to scrape the wax off. Get as much wax off as you possibly can. Scrape it right down nice and smooth. And the last step, just take your brush and brush her down. A final wipe. And we're good to go. Now you should be ripping down past everyone on the mountain, just like me. Alright guys, that's how to tune your board like a pro. Get these basic steps down, and you'll be ripping it up down the mountain past all your buddies. You'll be the envy of the crowd. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Now, let's talk about how to tune your roughest point. Oh, for fuck's sakes, man.